Welcome back to the Inglit Hit. Today we'll dip back into an Inspector Calls, zooming in on the character of Gerald Croft. Is he a dutiful, doting fiancé, or a sleazy, adulterous playboy? The key issue is this: does Gerald act out of greed and lust, or are his actions motivated by sympathy and genuine attraction? I want us to notice 4 things about Gerald. First, that Gerald is set up as an eligible bachelor. Second, that even at the beginning, Gerald's facade of politeness masks the reality of his lifestyle. Third, that Gerald is sensitive but foolish. And finally, that his self-interest supersedes his guilty conscience. First then, Priestley builds up a picture of Gerald Croft as a highly eligible bachelor. 2 things add to this impression of Gerald. His familial status. Gerald Croft is, according to the setting description, well-bred. Here we almost see Gerald through the lens of the Burling family. He is a means to an end, a financial and social connection for their daughter, and by implication themselves. Mr. Burling constantly makes reference to Gerald's family. "It's a pity Sir George and Lady Croft can't be with us." The phatic filler, that's a hesitation marker, is an early indication of the class imbalance between the families. While Mr. Burling seeks to highlight how Sheila is marrying up, his awkwardness is exposed, and thus Gerald's superior status is made clear. Hypergamy, a term used to describe the act of a person marrying a spouse of higher social status than themselves, was prevalent in Victorian England. The titles make it obvious that Gerald is a member of the aristocracy. It is important to distinguish between the Burlings as an upper-middle-class family and the Crofts as upper-class. In fact, Mr. Burling makes an especial effort to remedy this inequality when he says, "I have an idea that your mother, Lady Croft, while she doesn't object to my girl, feels you might have done better for yourself socially. There's a fair chance that I might find my way into the next honours list. Just at knighthood, of course." He acts obsequiously. That means he sucks up to him around Gerald, constructing a picture of his family as an attractive prospect. But his language is fragmented, divided by dashes that break up the dialogue. Mr. Burling is a man who respects Gerald's position and regards him as an eligible fiancé for his daughter. It becomes increasingly clear that the Burlings form their opinions of Gerald by way of his financial and social credentials. When the inspector arrives, Mr. Burling introduces Gerald as, "This is Mr. Gerald Croft, the son of Sir George Croft, Crofts Limited." Interestingly, Sheila says this of her engagement ring: "Careful! I'll never let it go out of my sight for an instant." She evidently values commodities more than her prospective husband. Only minutes earlier, she had said this of Gerald's summer hiatus: "I wondered what had happened to you." It is quite clear that Gerald is an eligible match due to his familial status. Ultimately, that's what this family values, isn't it? Wealth and status. People, and all their accompanying feelings and emotions, are secondary to that aim. Mr. Burling puts it best in his analysis of Gerald's character: "You're just the kind of son-in-law I always wanted." Second, one other thing that adds to the impression of Gerald as a highly eligible bachelor: manner. At the beginning of the play, Gerald is set up as a dutiful and polite guest. His first stage directions read as follows: politely, smiling, quietly, smiling. Gerald, rather embarrassed, begins to murmur some dissent, but Burling checks him. Here is a man who smiles at the right moments, speaks in the right tone, and says the right things. He compliments the food. "Absolutely first class!" However, his manner extends beyond appropriate politeness. Gerald is set on an exaggerated sycophancy that seems almost absurd. He is obsequious, he grovels, he flatters, he sucks up to the Burlings with everything he has. Why? Well, he has to make a good impression because he is the new kid on the block. But does it go further than that? He is determined to agree with everything the Burlings say. "I agree. I think my father would agree to that. I believe you're right, sir. I know she'd be delighted. That's true." We're all a little bit like that, agreeing with people to save face in public, not wanting to cause conflict or disagreement, so happily nodding along to avoid an embarrassing situation. Stuart Lee, the comedian, said this of Richard Hammond: "You sort of get the sense that he's all right, really, but he's in with a bad crowd. But it's Hammond who Lee hates the most out of the Top Gear presenters, and he goes on to explain why by talking about Top Gear's controversial joke about Gordon Brown's disabled child, and how Richard Hammond reacts live on screen. At the same time as laughing, Richard Hammond tries to make a disapproving face. It's the same sort of thing with Gerald Croft. His manner is one of supreme politeness, all in an attempt to mask the reality. This helpfully provides a natural link into the next point. Even at the beginning, Gerald's facade of politeness masks the reality of his lifestyle. We see it most clearly in Sheila's challenge to Gerald on his whereabouts the previous summer. Here's a section from the beginning of Act 1. "And I've told you, I was awfully busy at the works all that time." "Yes, that's what you say." In the stage direction, Priestley helps us see how this underlying tension between the engaged couple is one that could be more significant later. Sheila is divided in her approach, torn between saving face and laughing along, or calling him out explicitly on what is a very real concern for her. Her half-hearted attempt exposes the distrust in the relationship, with the italicised "you" giving the audience reason to suspect what Gerald might have been up to. He is deliberately evasive, and despite his politeness, we are inclined to judge him on these revelatory moments. He is surprised when the inspector asks him to stay. He is initially confident of his innocence. "Well, there's nothing to settle as far as I'm concerned." But he soon begins to doubt himself, rather uneasily. "Well, I don't suppose I have." And the audience might start to question his facade of politeness and whether he had been masking the reality all along. This is reminiscent of the Macbeth's attempts to conceal their true intentions, isn't it? Look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent under it. He tries to maintain his denial when he is interrogated by Sheila alone, pleading naivety. "Why should I have known her?" He even attempts flattery where Sheila is concerned, calling her darling. This is soon rebuffed by his fiancée, who lectures him on his guilt. She even goes as far as to call him a fool for thinking he can evade the inspector's line of questioning. While Gerald is deliberately evasive at the beginning, desperately trying to cling on to his reputation, the story of his past affair with Daisy Renton, or Eva Smith, reveals a certain sensitivity in his character. But as Sheila herself says, he is, ultimately, foolish. He says this of his first meeting with Eva. "The girl saw me looking at her, and then gave me a glance that was nothing less than a cry for help." He uses the emotive language of a cry for help, which illustrates the genuine sympathy he felt for her. I wonder what you think about Gerald's efforts in securing Eva those rooms. Did he do it purely out of the kindness of his heart? Was he motivated by altruism? Or was there something in it for him? He denies this profusely. "I didn't install her there so that I could make love to her." But as Sheila notes, he may have done so in order to feel as though he was needed. A feminist might highlight Eva's dependence on a male figure for financial and emotional security. Gerald has exploited Eva for his own benefit. As Sheila put it, he is the wonderful fairy prince. The sarcasm highlights just how far Sheila has come in terms of her perception of Gerald. He is reduced to a mockery in her eyes, lacking in the respect and grandeur that was bestowed on him at the beginning. What do you think Gerald's motivations were? If anything, he was certainly foolish. He allowed Eva to grow to love him and then broke it off. Another example of rejection to add to her pile. And Gerald's focus is ultimately on his own feelings. It is my belief, at least, that Priestley depicts Gerald as a character who orientates his actions around what will be most advantageous to him. He says this of Eva. "She didn't blame me at all. I wish to God she had now. Perhaps I'd feel better about it." Really, it is all about Gerald and his feelings, isn't it? For all his self-reflection, his walkabout and his being alone for a little while, Gerald is a man who puts his self-interest above the needs of others. He is just another pathetic example of an upper-class man set on advancing his financial and social prospects. Actually, he is no better than Mr. and Mrs. Burling when it comes to it. He returns with a special reason, set on undoing all that the inspector has exposed. "That man wasn't a police officer." He believes they have been had. and disregards the consequences of his actions in favour of reinstating his reputation. Sheila puts it most bluntly, "I suppose we're all nice people now." Gerald, being that much older than Sheila, has put himself firmly in the Mr. and Mrs. Burling camp, the older generation, and even asks Mr. Burling, "Was it a hoax?" As though the tangibility of the inspector's interrogation can undermine his affair with Eva, can right all the wrongs that he's committed. It is most interesting that Gerald's walkabout was not put to good use as we might see it, reflecting on his misdemeanours and considering how he will live in the future. Instead, he had time to cool off and think things out a little. His naivety is almost laughable when he holds up the ring and says, "Everything's all right now, Sheila." Here is a man whose self-interest supersedes his guilty conscience. Gerald Croft, Prince Charming, or sleazy playboy? Well, I think it is the latter. What is your view of Gerald Croft? If you liked this video, please subscribe below.